Good afternoon everyone, and welcome to the very first webinar for VRM Biologik. My name's Clinton, and I'm coming along with you today to try and teach you a little bit about tomatoes hopefully, and then also as a bit of an introduction into VRM and what we kind of do. Our aim for today is that we would like to, by the end of this, that you understand a bit more about how a tomato plant grows and the best ways to grow that in your garden and the best products to utilise to make that work the best. Bit of a background on tomatoes. So tomatoes were originally found in South America, and since then they'd been brought back to Europe and everything else and cultivated for very many years now to the various different types and things that we're used to in the stores. They didn't always look like that, but there's literally hundreds and hundreds of different types of varieties. The tomatoes have actually had a lot of research done into them over the years, and probably one of the most researched fruits out of the fruits and vegetable products, so that the genome's actually been pretty well sequenced, and everything's been they're very accurate with their breeding now. They can actually put in very specific different traits that they want in a product, so you can get, from large fruit to really beefsteak types to even little black ones as well. So there's lots of different types and lots of different ways of doing it, but to the credit of the tomato industry, they certainly haven't gone down the path of the genetically modified stuff. So everything's been traditionally bred, and there's quite a lot of different stuff out there. So the reason that tomatoes have been so popular is mostly because of their versatility. So they've been used for many years in just fresh, or you can use them in cooking, sauces, pizzas and all sorts of different things. So you've got plenty of options with tomatoes, and that's why they're a great addition to any home garden, or even if you're looking at growing them commercially, there's a big market for those sort of products. Tomatoes can be grown just about anywhere. They don't like frost, but they do like differences between the day and the night temperature, so that's something to keep it. They probably don't enjoy the real hot summers like up in the north and the tropics and things. However, generally speaking, they will grow just about anywhere, and it just depends on how you manage them as to what sort of quality you'll get out of them. My background was originally in hydroponics and growing hydroponic tomatoes, so you might say I know a little bit about tomatoes. And since then I've progressed on to now where I'm sort of linking back into working with soils and regenerating and improving soils, and that's sort of the link where sort of working with our VRM Biologik. You might ask why soils or hydroponics over soils and things like that. Both systems have their merits. Hydroponics really came about as a way to eliminate some of the variables that are seen in normal growing systems. So by controlling the irrigation really strictly, you can control the irrigation and the fertilizer that the plants are getting at any one time, and that can give you some really good control, which leads to some really uniform and quality product. And then from there, like, things have evolved into greenhouse horticulture and things where we start to control the weather and the climate and even the light levels now. But I guess one problem that it has is that it's lost its link back to nature a little bit, and that's where sort of growing in soils and growing in a natural environment has a really close link back to our health and to the quality of product overall. So I think that's something in the way that we've probably had a problem with our soils, and why we headed to hydroponics was because we're having troubles in a degrading environment. But now we've got the system called regenerative agriculture, and that's where we're going to regenerate the soils and make sure that we get them back to the way they should be, and we can end up growing some nice, beautiful, healthy product. So what makes a healthy soil? So soils are a hugely diverse sort of thing in our environment, in our world, where we've got heavy clays right down to sandy soils at the beach and things like that. So it's something that everywhere you go, from whether you're a kid playing in the soil making mud pies to an adult digging a garden, or even if you ever bogged a car, you'll certainly notice the different types of soils around the place. A good healthy soil has a good mixture of all, clay and sand and everything, and you want to have a good airfield porosity, but it also needs to be biologically active. It needs to have life. Soil is actually alive, and it's probably something that we've come to realise over the last couple of decades, that the life in the soil is actually probably one of the key components of why we're actually here in the world in the first place. So Making sure that you've got a well-balanced soil that has good soil biology in it is the key to growing anything that's kind of nice and good. One way to do that is, of course, creating in your garden or in your pots and things like that, you want an environment where the microbes and soil biology are going to want to live. So one of the keys to that is carbon. And a good way to do that is to, we have a couple of products. So we have our Humisoil product, which can be spread into the soils. This is a hard product that's been fermented and is biologically active. So you can add that to your soil, to your pots, to your soil garden, and that'll help increase your soil biology and rebuild that component. It'll help rebuild your soil structure and improve nutrient holding and sharing as well. And the other one is our Accelerate Bio product, which is a liquid product that you can spray on the plants or onto the soil, and that'll help improve your soil biology and improve your overall sustainability as well. I touched on the topic of Regen Farming earlier. So this is something that's gaining a lot of momentum in circles at the moment, and it's about not just farming or creating a product, it's about improving the soil and everything that we're utilising to do so. I think we're going to see a big movement in that space as we're going forward. We want to, for a long time, we've been taking everything out of the soil in terms of things that we grow. Whenever you harvest something, you're taking something away. And quite often what we're not doing is not putting anything back. So regenerative farming is about putting back what we've taken out and really sort of rebuilding the soils and the structures and putting back what should be there. For instance, carbon is a huge component of that. Our soils, our agricultural soils around the world are severely depleted in carbon, and we have an excess of carbon in the air. So the best place to put it is to take it out of the air and put it back in the soils. And that's something that we're looking at doing with regenerative farming and utilising waste products and creating a sustainable fertiliser replacement that's going to not just grow plants, but it's going to improve the soil. It's going to help with your soil structure, your nutrient retention, and overall friability and things with the soil. On to a bit more specifics about the tomatoes. So first things first, when you're looking at planting in your garden, you're going to have seed selection or plant selection. These plants are just ones that have picked up from the nursery. Realistically, like the better quality seeds or the better quality plants you can purchase at the beginning, the better start you're going to get in your garden. Seeds, if you're going to do via seeds, I recommend having like a little seedling tray and plant them out and keep them indoors to begin with. Maybe have like a little plastic cover over the top to keep the humidity up. Wait until they germinate and sprout before you look at planting them in the garden. Make sure they're up and nice and big and nice and healthy like these guys here. You can transplant them a couple of times into different pots and whatnot, different size pots, just depending on what you've got and what you're up to. You can sow direct, but there's a lot of things going on in your garden that's hard to regulate, so just keep that in mind when you do. You might get a few more losses, but by all means have a go. Best thing about farming, about growing stuff in your garden is you're just having a go, right? I picked this plant here in particular because it's a really strong, healthy plant. So this is the sort of thing you want to look for at your nursery and stuff when you're going. You want nice, thick, healthy stems, and you want a good distribution of leaves and nice size leaves. This plant's probably a little bit older than some of the others, but you can see that it's had a good amount of sunlight. It's got a nice colour. There's no real damage and there's no real discolorations that can cause problems. You can see with these guys here, they're a little bit smaller, so they've probably had less sunlight. This guy's a little bit too small. You wouldn't be planting him in the garden just yet. But these guys here aren't too bad. But if you notice at the top, there's a little bit of discoloration. That could be just a little bit of overwatering and not enough fertiliser. But if you've got a better option, go with the better option. But it is possible to rescue these plants, so don't give up on them just yet. These guys are a little bit different. These are a slightly different variety. So these are like a Black Russian style tomato, so the little tomato. You can see there's a few extra plants there. We can probably actually plant them out, so you've got a little bit extra value there if you wanted. But once again, just sort of, they're probably a little bit skinny, but they are quite close together and things, so just sort of keep an eye on that sort of stuff. So we do have a few options when planting your tomatoes. So today we're looking at like if you're going to be doing some home gardening and things. You can always put them in pots. You can always plant them in a nice sunny spot in your garden. So plants in general, but certainly tomato plants enjoy quite a lot of sun. Each one of these leaves is a huge solar panel, and without that, the plant's not going to be able to create sugars and carbohydrates that it's going to need to grow. So looking at location selection, you want a position in your garden that's going to be nice and sunny. But it doesn't have to be sunny all the time, just so long as you're getting quite a lot of sunlight hours for the plants through the day. And in really hot conditions or hot climates, you probably want to protect them a little bit more through the middle of the day. In Australia in particular, maybe not so much the rest of the world, but our light curve goes up and down like this, and we really only need a light level in around this range. So this part up here is kind of wasted, and that just generates a lot of heat and a lot of stress. So keep that in mind. In Queensland at the moment, it's probably the perfect time to start looking at planting your tomatoes. Winter time in Queensland is still very warm, and it's also because we don't get frost, it's perfect timing to really get your tomatoes in and get them started. Down south, I'd probably wait until the frosts are over, unless you've got a frost blanket, or if you've got a greenhouse. Greenhouse is still perfect for it. But just sort of keep in mind that your plants do need a little bit of love. One of the questions that popped up was about what is the best tasting tomato, or which would you select as one of the best ones? Generally speaking, if you're selecting a fruit on flavour, the smaller ones are always going to be a little bit more intense in flavour. So that's just because the sugars are a little bit more concentrated into the little small forms, and then the larger ones have just got a little bit more water in them. So if you're thinking about what purposes you're going to use them for, if you're going to use them in a salad and things, probably definitely the smaller ones. Whereas if you're going to use them on a sandwich or in cooking and stuff, the bigger ones. The two main types you've got are usually your round ones or your plum-shaped ones. The plum-shaped ones, or your Roma types, are generally speaking going to have more flesh. So the more flesh in the fruit makes them more ideal for cooking. Some people have a preference for their flavour and stuff. However, generally you sort of say, okay, the smaller rounder ones and whatnot are going to be a little bit more juicy, so ideal for eating in a salad and other things, whereas the more fleshy ones more for your sauces and putting in with pasta and other bits and pieces. Flavour is also something that is a key component when growing. So it is possible, like some of it's going to be genetic, but a lot of it's also going to come down to how you grow the plants. So growing a healthy, well-balanced plant in a soil, or in a, if it's hydroponics or everything else, with a good nutrient balance is really the key to that kind of side of flavour. So if you've got a soil that's biologically active, that has a good nutrient cycle going on, so if your plant's missing something, you just won't get the flavour. So you need to be looking at your plant all the time and getting little tips and signals from your plant as to whether or not it's happy and healthy, and you can sort of start to then grow up and create a nice plant from there. And if your plant's getting plenty of sun, plenty of water, and then plenty of nutrition, you should be able to make a really nice tasty fruit. Once you've got your location selected, I'd probably recommend that you clear the spot of weeds first, and then give it a bit of a dig. This is just to loosen it up so that your tomato plants, when you put them in, they've got the soil's not too hard and compacted where your roots are going to want to grow. This would be a good time to apply your humisoil. Sprinkle that over the top. The rate will be on the bucket and whatnot. Sprinkle that over the top. Get a bit of Accelerate Bio and water that in as well. And then just turn it in. And ideally we'd probably leave that for about 2 weeks. And this is in the soil in your backyard, and that just gives the products enough time to create and stimulate that soil biology before your plants go in. In particular, things like improving your phosphorus availability is an important one. So if you're planting in seed or seedlings, they have a high phosphorus requirement early on for that root growth. So if you give that product a little bit of time to work, you'll get a much healthier plant growing up from there as well. If you're doing like what I've got on the side here with just a couple of old pots, we've had something growing in there last season, so all we did is just return the organic matter to the pot, bit of humisoil and a bit of Accelerate Bio, and then it's just left until we're ready for this season. So that's just something I brought along, just a bit of organic matter on the top as a bit of a sort of a protectant. It sort of helps keep it, the soil underneath nice and moist and protected for the season. And what you'll find, I don't know if I'll find any right now, but there we go. You end up with things like plenty of nice little earthworms and stuff through your products. So creating that sort of system over the season, so don't throw anything out, make sure you're recycling everything and putting it back and giving it time to compost and have an impact in your soil. That's why your worms are there. It's to return those nutrients and everything else back to that soil. So by letting it sit over the summer with the organic matter and the worms and everything in there, that's ready to go, and that couldn't really be better for our plants to start off in. So in terms of planting, we'll just get one of the little fellas because they're always a bit of fun. Try and get him out of the pot as gently as you can. So I can see straight away from here, you can see this one's a little bit waterlogged. Normally what we'd like to see is a lot more bright white roots in that area for that size plant. There are some there, so he's still nice and healthy, which is good, but he's probably just had a little bit too much love up until this point. So that's something to look out for. Probably want to see more of these white roots right through there, and he'd probably be a little bit stronger, a little bit more healthy if we had that choice. In terms of putting him in a pot or in the soil, they don't need much room, small little hole, and then just fill the soil in around it, pat him down, and we're done. It's really that simple. If you have quite a long skinny plant like these little fellas here, there's no harm in planting them a little bit deeper, and that'll just help give you a little bit more stronger plant, but it'll also mean all that area there will start to grow roots then once it's in the soil. So that'll just help improve the healthier plant early on and allow it to establish a little bit better. In terms of densities and things, how many plants you're going to put in and whatnot, you have a lot of flexibility with tomatoes, and it's really up to you, and it's probably a little bit of trial and error. If you've got a warm, dry climate, you probably want them a little bit closer together so they can grow together and create their own little microclimate. If you're in an area that's a lot more humid or a little bit cooler, probably want to spread them out a little bit so that they've got a little bit more airflow, so you're not going to have fungal issues and stuff. But once again, it's your garden, your opportunity to try some things, so don't be afraid to, if something doesn't work, just change it up for next time. If you've got too many plants, take one out, so probably start out with more, and you can always just trim them back if you need to. I touched on it just a moment ago about that plant when I pulled it out of the little pocket here. Irrigation. Irrigation is realistically the key to plant health. If the plant's got ample water, but not too much water, then you're going to have a good growth cycle and a good healthy plant through the season. Tips and tricks, assess your soil or your pots or whatever medium you're using beforehand. If you've got a high clay content and stuff, you're not going to need to water as often. If you've got a really sandy soil, you're going to need to water more. So keep that in mind when you're doing it to look after your plants. Stressed plants are not going to be healthy plants. They become more susceptible to disease and stuff. So keep that in mind. Plants do need love, especially when you're trying to maximise your fruit growth out of them. It's not really a chuck in the garden and forget situation, even though you might get a result. But if you want to get good tomatoes, if you actually want to see some quality product, well, you need to put a bit of time and a bit of love into them. In terms of irrigation tips, one of the big tricks with it is I think people get caught up in watering when it's convenient for them and not when it's convenient for the plants. So always keep that in mind, that you want to irrigate when the plants need it. And from that point of view, irrigating in the mornings is probably the best. So we want to prepare the plant for the day, and if it's going to be a stressful hot day, you want to make sure that water is there early and available. Watering them at night is a bad idea. What you'll find is the water's not used through the plant then, so through the night, and the roots will be sitting in a really damp and wet environment in the soils or in the pots, and they need oxygen in that zone during nighttime for growth. So in that situation where that little plant there was really, really wet, what you'll see is you'll start to reduce your root zone. The roots will die off, or there'll be less of them. And then when you do get the hot days down the track or the next day or whatever, that plant doesn't have enough capacity to then grow. And what'll happen is you'll see all the leaves will just start to turn down and wilt. And once you start getting those sorts of problems, it's really hard to sort of rescue a plant and keep it going from there. So keep that in mind. Monitor your plants, water them in the mornings. Try not to overwater them, but if you do, at least if you do it in the morning, there's a chance for it all to drain away and be less of an issue. Irrigation, another good tip is if you are going to be checking on them and watering them a lot, probably keep them closer to the house rather than way down the back paddock. It's a lot easier to, if you're walking past them often, you'll notice different things, you'll understand your plants a little bit more, you'll see if they're struggling and you can sort of help them out a bit more. So don't try and hide them away in the back garden, put them somewhere where you're going to notice them more often and look after them. Fertilization. It's a big component of making sure that your plants are healthy. You can't just sort of throw them in the ground and hope that they'll just do with whatever's there. Like a little bit of fertilizer, or in this case utilising your humus soil and accelerate bio, should be sufficient for the season. However, if you really want to push your plants a bit more, you can add a little bit more fertilizer and stuff. It's not going to hurt that sort of side of things. Big key is having a good balanced nutrition, so making sure you've got a bit of everything there. There's a scientific thing called, I think it's Liebig's law at the minimum, where when you've got something that's limiting, so if it's missing something altogether, that's going to be the point that's going to limit the rest of your plant growth and your fruit production. So having and making sure that you've got a little bit of everything in there in terms of your fertilizer mix is going to be really important. And creating that naturally through having plenty of organic matter and organic carbon in your soils, and allowing and having plenty of biology there to actually create those nutrient cycles is going to be really important to making sure you've got a healthy tomato plant, but in general for your grass, trees, anything you're trying to grow, it's important to have that balance in there. We also have, if you are having a little bit of trouble, there's a few other products on the website you can check out. We've got some foliar applications there. One in particular is Accelerate Calcium. It's a really good one to help with inducing flowering and encouraging your plants to fruit. So that's a good little tip there. If you're seeing a lot of plant and not enough flower, get a bit of that on. That's going to help improve your calcium uptake, which is going to help with fruit quality and the overall plant quality, as your cell structure will be stronger and a little bit better. Plant maintenance. This is something that, generally speaking, in the home garden, it's a little bit forgotten about. Usually we have a tendency to go with what's easy, and we'll just sort of chuck the plants in the ground and see what happens. But plants need a little bit more attention than that. And this plant, for a good example, is going to want to grow up this way. So because we're probably only going to get up to sort of 10 mil head width or something, we're actually going to need to support that plant as it grows up. Otherwise it'll fall over and grow along the ground, which you're going to start to restrict your amount of light that the plant's getting. You've then got leaves and everything else in contact with the ground and with the water and other things that are there, so you're going to have potentially fungal issues and other bits and pieces that are going to start limiting what your plant can do. So make sure that you've got a little trellis or something you can train them up. Might be a fence, might be just a couple of bits of string, doesn't need to be much, can just be a timber stake, whatever you're doing, and train that plant up. In hydroponics, what we tend to do is we'll tend to keep just one plant and then one root stock, and keep each one like that so we can gain uniformity. If you can see on here, this little fella here, that's actually what we call a lateral or a sucker, or it's also more scientifically known as a meristem. So the top of your plant is called an apical meristem, and that's where the majority of your hormones and nutrients and everything are going. That's what makes your plant try and grow directly upwards. But this little fella here can actually turn into its own plant as well. So if you let this one grow out, it'll actually become its own plant with its own flowers and everything as well. So you can end up with multiple heads growing off one plant. This is a great way of increasing your density in your garden if you want to be a bit tight and just buy one plant and make 4 or 5 or 6. But just try and remember that one little root zone is trying to support all that plant. So that's going to start to affect your uniformity of different size fruits and everything else that you've got. So just keep that in mind. If you do break the top off this one, you can regrow the side one. So that's you don't have to throw the plant out straight away and whatnot. However, in certain circumstances, you might actually just want to take those off just so you've got that one plant concentrating all the nutrients and everything else. Another thing is around the base of the plant, we actually want to keep it semi-open and clear. What'll happen is that that zone around the base of the plant is usually where a lot of the moisture and humidity is, and not a lot of airflow. And what will happen is that's where you'll start to see if you're going to get a fungus problem on your leaves and stuff. That's where it'll start down low. So in terms of preventing that kind of style thing, what we usually like to try and do is we'll probably try and take these little leaves off from the base early on. And it's just a case of pinching them off, or if you wanted to, you can use a knife or a pair of scissors, but you can just pinch them off. And I've just left that on there, that little shoot on there for now, just in case. But what that'll do is in your garden or in your pots and everything else, it just creates that zone of difference between the bottom of the plant and the soil, so you keep that bit of airflow, and that'll help stop some of your fungal issues, which we tend to have issues with in the garden. So that's a good little tip there. Through the rest of the season though, in terms of maintenance, just take off any dead leaves that you see. Keep the plant reasonably nice and open, so if you've got a cooler, more moist climate, don't be afraid to take a few more leaves off, whereas if it's hot and sunny and other things, you want as many leaves as possible, so keep that in mind. A way to tell if you're hitting the right leaf densities and things like that is that a leaf will be like a good size, about the size of your hand. If you've got too high humidity and like too much, you're probably over irrigating and other bits and pieces, or you're not getting enough sun as a key, your leaf will actually get bigger. So what it's trying to do there is trying to maximise its surface area to capture more sun. So if you're getting really big leaves, you probably want to back off your watering or take a few off so that you're getting a bit more airflow. But the converse is true as well. So if you're getting really small, skinny leaves, it means you're getting too much sun and it's too dry. So you might want to look at, increasing your humidity, a little bit more water and things like that to try and maintain your plants from there. One of the other things you can do as well is with your fruit. So if you want to try and achieve quite uniform fruit, I haven't got any flowers on these ones at the moment, but when they throw out a truss of flowers, there's going to be a variety, like quite a number of flowers on that truss. With the larger types, you only want to keep it down to about 4 or 5 fruits on that truss, because after that they start getting really small and quite often they won't work out. So you can actually go along and prune those flowers off to keep the number of fruits a little bit lower, and that'll actually help make your fruits a little bit bigger. So all we're trying to do is concentrate the energy that the plant's capturing from the sun and putting it into the number of fruits that we want to see from it. And that's going to help improve not just your quality of those fruits, but it's also going to improve your size and uniformity. So the smaller types where you're going to have a lot of flowers, you can probably leave those go and just pick them as they're ready. The bigger ones, you probably don't want as many flowers on the truss because you're going to lose size. But look at your plant. If your plant's looking too stressed and things, you might want to reduce that load on the plant, which is reducing the number of fruits or the number of flowers. And that's a good way of sort of helping your plant out as well, especially when it's younger. Let it establish first, build a nice root system below it, and then allow it to start making fruit and flowers. So you can just do that simply by pinching them off like what we did with the leaves. So have a look at that, have a bit of a play with that. That's going to be something that's going to really help. I've seen a lot of home gardeners where the plants are just left to do their own thing, and then you kind of don't really get any fruit or a lot of good fruit from it. And that's because it's trying to share that energy with too many little things that are going on, and quite often you'll end up with a lot of shitty, no good fruit rather than a few really nice good ones. So just sort of play around with that and see how you go. Sometimes what you'll get in the garden as well is that maybe you don't have many bees if you're in town and things like that, or it's a little bit sheltered and things. Tomatoes are a self-pollinating plant, which means that by a little bit of wind or shaking, or by tapping the plant or tapping the flowers, you can actually pollinate the flowers that way. So if you're finding that your flowers are getting to the flower point but they're not turning into fruit, it's quite often because you're not getting any pollination. So it could be the time of year, if it's a bit cold, the bees aren't active and things like that. You can actually go out and just tap the plants and stuff yourself and actually pollinate them that way. So that's a little bit of a tip if you're having a bit of trouble in that area. So problems you can get with your plants. I think we touched on a little bit of your fungus problems. Quite often those are going to be directly related to climate or overwatering and bits and pieces at the base of the plant and then carry on through the plant. You can use chemical control for those. Prevention is always better than cure though if you can avoid it. So look at the little bits and pieces, make sure you're looking after your watering. Don't let your plants get stressed. They're always more susceptible to fungus and disease if they're stressed. So if you're looking after your plants nicely, plenty of water, plenty of fertilizer, you shouldn't have too many issues. But if you do, taking off the leaves that are affected and removing them from that area in your garden, watching that a tip for if you are getting some fungus issues is don't hose your plants themselves, because that'll actually spread it around. So just try and, if you're going to do like a drip irrigation or something, or just water the base of your plants, that's also a really good tip. And then from there on the market, there are a few biologically safe control methods for them that you can purchase, but always make sure you read the label and check that out. Pests and disease. Pests are a large problem in tomatoes just because they are quite tasty and attractive to quite a lot of number of insects. Again, there are chemical controls available out there. You're going to get some different ones like whiteflies and thrips and things that are going to be really hard to control depending on where you are, other people, what they're growing and stuff like that. There are some lighter alternatives that are available, which is good to make sure you do your research and check those out in terms of options. Caterpillars and things, you can just pick them off the plants. That's often quite an easy way of doing things. There's also a system now that's called, which you can actually utilise bugs against bugs. So you can do a bit of research on that. There's options in most countries and states now where you've got, you can actually purchase predator insects that are going to eat the other insects. So that's a really cool, sustainable way of looking after your gardens. You'll probably be surprised the other effects if you're just focusing on tomatoes, but those pests are usually in the rest of your garden as well. So you'll actually probably have a positive impact on the whole garden by introducing those. So just keep an eye on that. Tomatoes will go through different phases. Make sure there are some viruses and things that they can get. Most of those are going to be shown to you through like discoloration on the leaves, like a striping and other bits and pieces. If you do start to get those problems, just remove that plant from that area and that zone. You're probably better off doing that earlier rather than later. That's going to stop it from spreading to your other plants and causing problems. This can be, an issue to consider from your neighbours and things like that point of view too. If you leave those plants in your garden full of virus, it's going to share around to other things as well. So just keep that in mind and make sure you stay on top of them. And that's part of the selection at the nursery will be a big key to that too. Make sure you're not seeing any symptoms in that on when you're starting. In terms of your plants, things such as fertilizer deficiencies or nutrient deficiencies will show up on your plant. There's plenty of different apps and other things, and just check stuff out on the web. You'll see things like discoloration, like yellowing, or maybe you've got a little burning at the margins and things. Your top of your plant might be really light in colour compared to the rest and things. They're usually signals of nutrient deficiencies or toxicities. So just have a bit of a search on the internet. You'll find plenty of information about different little problems, and usually it'll come down to, okay, you might need to change up and use a little bit different fertiliser or whatnot, or maybe even reduce a bit of fertiliser, a bit more water. There's a couple of options there to go through, but just don't be afraid to have a bit of a Google and a bit of a check it out. There's lots of resources out there for that kind of stuff, or hit us up in the chat. We can always help out and try and see if we can be of any sort of help in that area. One of the things we're looking at is organic. Is organic the key? A lot of people are looking at now. There's options in supermarkets to purchase organic produce, which actually costs a bit more. The reason it usually costs a bit more is that organic farming is using more traditional or old school techniques where they're not utilising chemical fertilisers or the chemical controls for insects and things. These tend to be a little bit less effective, and what ends up happening is that you need to grow more plants to create the same amount, or cover more area to create the same amount of produce you would off a different type of farm. So your efficiency is a little bit different. And this kind of leads to where you need a little bit more labour and other bits and pieces, and this is what creates that extra cost and that extra problem. Now, does that make that fruit better? That's a good question, and we don't want to get too political on it, but the key to a good plant and a good healthy plant comes down to if you have that balance of nutrition, balance of water, and then the balance of sunlight and conditions. if you have those, you're going to have a good, healthy plant. I agree that limiting the amount of chemicals and the amount of exposure to chemicals that we have on those plants is extremely important as well, and it's going to be really important for our health. But I think that's where we're going to start seeing this pressure back into the next step, which is probably the better step, which is that regenerative farming phase, where we're actually looking at not just producing a chemical-free product, but we're actually going to produce a product that actually improves the soil over time, so that we're actually, getting back to where we don't need to continue to add fertilizers and things, because our soils are biologically active and they're creating their own systems, nutrient cycles, and that's going to improve the quality of our fruit and everything else. And that's another big component of it, is the spraying of any sort of chemical or herbicide and things in your garden, on your plants. It has an impact where it's going to start killing off your microbiology and the biology that lives in the soil and lives on the plants. And that's an extremely important component to our life cycles. We're extremely reliant on the environment, whether it's the fruits and vegetables it provides, but also more so than we realised, and what we're starting to understand a lot more of now, is that we're intrinsically linked to the soil and everything that lives in the soil. So all the microorganisms that go together to make a plant grow and make it fruit and everything else are linked in what makes us grow and makes us healthy as well. So making sure we've got a good balance of our biology happening in our soils and on our plants is really important to a healthy, happy life. Sort of getting towards the latter stages now, so I just wanted to bring up a couple of little things about some of the underlying principles of growing. Observation and trials are absolutely key. So don't be scared of your plants. Get out in the garden, touch them, feel them, smell them. Get to know what looks good and what doesn't look good on a plant. You can always tell a plant is stressed if you touch the leaves. If the leaves are warm to touch, it means they're not transpiring. If they're not transpiring, you've got a problem. So either it's too hot and dry, your plant's not getting enough sun, or there could be a multitude of different things. But sort of just start to do that sort of stuff where you're looking at your plants, playing with them, trialling them, and you'll start to realise when you make changes and what changes them, and understanding those changes is the key to be able to create a good plant in your garden. Don't be scared of it, guys. I think that's the biggest thing. I think people get scared of failure or scared of not doing the right things. It's your garden, it's your plants. Get out there and just trial it, and you're going to work out pretty quick what's going to happen. The odd bunch principle is something I'd like to bring up in terms of people that have done a lot of home gardening understand that it doesn't have to look perfect to be perfect. So we get caught up in the systems where we go to the supermarket and we buy the absolutely perfect looking product. That doesn't mean it's going to taste good or it's going to be healthy for you. So don't throw everything away in your garden. Make sure cut off the bad bits or whatever else, or don't be afraid of fruit that doesn't look perfect. In the systems at home and stuff like that, make sure you've got a compost bin or worm farm or something that you can put all your scraps into and then reuse that back in your garden. I think that sort of sustainability and that side of growing and combining everything back into the garden, into our lives, is going to be a really important step going into the future, as food security and food shortages and stuff become a real thing. Home gardening and looking after yourself and creating self-sustainability is a real key. And closing that loop and creating that circular economy in your own gardens at your own home, it's going to take the pressure off the system. It's going to take the pressure off you as well. So waste is a bit of a key. Any of your waste leaves and plant material and everything else, keep that in your garden, put it back into your soils. That carbon, that material is going to be great for feeding your microbes, that you're going to continue to build better and better topsoil in your garden, which is going to continue to make better and better plants over time. Language of plants is a funny one that I've sort of talked about a little bit, but realistically, the plants are going to tell you what's going on. So we've just got to understand what they're trying to say, and sort of it's the same with like kids or dogs or something like that. If they're sick, they're going to have little signals that are going to tell you that something's wrong, and it's just about interpreting those signals and working out what's going on. So keep an eye on your plants, look out for signals like a little bit of yellowing, might be this change in shape. size of leaves, how many flowers you've got. All those sorts of little things are real indicators of how well your plant is doing. And once you start to understand those, you can start to sort of changing the conditions that are going to make the plant grow better. So if you've got any questions on that sort of stuff, hit us up in the comments. There's probably lots and lots of little questions about different things that are happening and working on your plants. But don't be afraid to ask someone. You'd be surprised. The grandma down the road that she's been doing it for 30 years. They've got simple little tricks and things that have out there that can help. So don't be afraid to ask and talk to anyone about it. Probably in conclusion, I think best things to look for are nice healthy plants. Make sure you get them in your garden, get out there and start having a go. Improve your soils, make sure your soils are happy and biologically active. Give our products a try. We've got some Accelerate Bio, it's simple to just be spraying on things. You've got the Humisoil there for soil improvements and stuff, so give that stuff a try. Don't be afraid to try things. Get out in your garden. Regenerative agriculture is the way to go. Don't just take. We want to start to give back. We want to regenerate our soils. We want to regenerate our plants and regenerate our lives. So work hard with that. Don't waste anything. Put it all back into systems. Make sure you're utilising everything that you can. And good luck with your plants. I hope they all grow up nicely and you end up with a nice fruit and result. So thank you.